I fix my eyes on Christ. I fix my
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name's Colton. I like to talk about Bibles, books, and theology-related things. Today I have a book review for you, and that book is 9 Marks of a Healthy Church. This is the 4th edition of this book. I really like the cover. I think it looks really nice. And you may or may not be familiar with this concept of 9 Marks and 9 Marks Ministries. It's pretty well known by now. Our church, just spoiler alert, I guess, to some extent, our church is affiliated with 9 Marks. You know, we do hold these things to be important. Nonetheless, I thought it important to reread this book, give a review of it for you, and maybe there's some things in here that you just haven't thought about in terms of for your church. Now, this book, I would argue, is probably targeted more towards pastors as they kind of, lead the charge as far as implementing things in the church and really try and cultivate this sort of environment. I think it's for everyone to read, and I would encourage you to pick it up and give it a read. To this point with my book reviews, I haven't really done like a rating system, and I'm going to start doing that now, beginning with this book, to where I read it, give my thoughts on it, and then give it an overall score at the end. So the concept of healthy church is one that is very important to me. And, for a church to function biblically in a healthy way as God has designed it according to the scriptures. And that's really what I think this book is seeking to address. So what I'm going to do, sort of quickly, go through each of the marks, because each one composes a chapter of these 9 marks, give a little bit of brief commentary, talk about the positives and negatives, and then give my score. The first mark of a healthy church, according to this book, is expositional preaching. And if you don't know what that is, essentially, it's preaching that seeks to be faithful to the text of Scripture. And I know you might be thinking, well, that should be every preacher's goal. And you'd be right, it should. Oftentimes it isn't, unfortunately. And to preach expositionally takes work. The idea is you want your main point of your sermon to be the main point of the text, to not be putting into it things that don't belong, but rather expositionally to expose the text is the idea, to reveal its main intention and its point. So that's Mark 1. Mark 2 is gospel doctrine, having a healthy understanding of what the gospel itself is. I don't think that can be argued by anyone that that's important to the life of a church, given that we exist because of the gospel. Having healthy, deep, rich gospel doctrine. Love it. Point number 3, or mark number 3, I should say, is a biblical understanding of conversion and evangelism. This one is huge. Understanding what does it mean for someone to be born again, to be converted, to be a Christian. And then what does it mean to evangelize? How do we do that? How do we share the gospel appropriately? And Dever argues, to which I agree, that understanding conversion means, bottom line, we see that it is a work of God. That a person is born again, not by their own doing, but by the work of God. And you could get into the weeds with some of the theological nuances on that, but at the end of the day, as long as we're saying, okay, a person is made a Christian by the work of God, then we're biblically understanding the main point, the right thing. And then evangelism just being, this idea of correcting. Evangelism has been sort of dumbed down nowadays, to where it's like, repeat after me, pray this prayer, which I'm not attacking the sinner's prayer format. It can be helpful, in my opinion, at times, But the reality is, so that we're not telling people, you pray this prayer and you're saved. It's like, well, it's not about a mantra or magic words. It's about just simply responding to what God has done in your heart. And evangelism, as far as a church goes, the idea is that a healthy church has a culture of evangelism, that the entirety of the church understands that we are to be on mission in our lives, and we are to tell our friends and family and tell people about the gospel. And it's just a part of the culture. It's not just taking people to the pastor so he can explain the gospel. Church members ought to have a good understanding of the gospel so that they can evangelize. Fourth mark, a biblical understanding of church membership. This is the one where there is often a lack of clarity for people. What does it mean to be a member of a church? And this point, and all these points really are connected, but it's vitally important to understand church membership is not just like, you want to be a part of the club, cool, you're in. Like, there's something to that. The scripture tells us that the church has authority as far as discipline goes, which we'll get to in a second, and other matters. So to understand what it means to be a church member is vitally important. Mark 5, biblical church discipline. And, Dever argues this is greatly connected to church membership. But a church that practices church discipline is healthy because we're not simply just allowing sin to run rampant, but we are concerned with one another's sanctification, and that we are able to essentially walk through life together and not allow sin to have dominion in the church, and that's not an argument for absolute perfection or anything like that. It's just what Scripture teaches us in the book of Romans. Sin will have no dominion over you because you are under grace. So, biblical church discipline. Mark 6, biblical discipleship and growth. What does it really look like for the church to make disciples, to help people grow in their faith? And it breaks down some various things for that. It's good stuff. Mark 7, biblical church leadership. How has God in his word called the church to function as far as its leaders go? Pastors and elders, what does that look like? How should that be? Should there just be one pastor? Should there be a plurality of elders? Spoiler alert, that is the right answer biblically. But just kind of a breaking down of what does it look like for a church to have biblical church leadership in place. Mark 8, the practice of prayer. And I know you might be thinking, well, yeah, of course churches should pray, but what does that look like in the life of your church? Is your church a praying church? And, what are ways that we can do that corporately? I think it's very helpful in giving us to understand that, because oftentimes prayer is communicated as something that is just a private thing. You just pray on your own, and you should, but there is a place for corporate prayer as well, and it really addresses some of those things. And then the last one, Mark 9, the practice of biblical missions. What does it look like to support gospel works throughout the world? What does it mean? What does missions even mean? And it addresses these things, and essentially is saying, by no means is this an exhaustive list that this covers everything about what makes a church healthy, but these are 9 marks that really help, at least for me, what it's been helpful to is if you focus on these things and really try and implement them because they are biblical things, you will see more health happen in your church. And by health, we mean it functioning the way God has revealed in his word that a church should function. So, what are the positives of this book? I think it is absolutely clarifying with biblical support. It's not just making these points because they sound cool. It's not, hey, we should try this. There's so much I've been a part of in the past of this idea of, we just have to try all these creative things and all that. And there's nothing wrong with creativity, but there is something wrong with it if we're missing the main points from Scripture on how a church should function. And we can easily find ourselves outside of the bounds of Scripture for how it says a church should function. So there's biblical support that's very, very much there. The other positive, which I think is just the main one, there's not enough discussion on church health nowadays. And 9 Marks has really put a big dent in that as a whole, the ministry of 9 Marks. And it really has helped us to think more clearly about these things and the need for this discussion, for our churches to care about whether or not they are biblically healthy or not. Are we functioning according to the way the Bible is said? And this discussion needs to happen in your church and in mine and in everyone that claims to be a part of the Church of Jesus Christ, the true church. We need to consider these things. The negatives. There's not a lot for me, big surprise given that I'm very much on board with most of this stuff. I think the negatives for people, though, and I can even see this as well, is centered around church membership. I've often heard it said, is church membership even biblical? And, how do we define church membership? What does that even look like? And, I would say church membership is biblical. Otherwise, what does the Bible mean when it says the church has been given authority to bind and loose and all of those sorts of things? Church discipline could not work without church members. It's not given to merely pastors to practice discipline. It's the body. It's the church congregation as a whole. And surprise, spoiler alert, I am congregational, which is Dever's view as well. But your being a member of a church matters. But I do understand how maybe a negative for some people would be, how do I understand that biblically? Because there's things that Dever recommends that we practice that, as far as church membership goes, such as a membership covenant and, holding members to a certain standard that you may be like, I don't see it in the Bible, but I could argue they're implied, but I understand that there's some lack of clarity with some of those things. And that's really the only major negative, I would say, even though I tend to agree with Dever. My overall score for this is insanely high because I am, like I said, on board with these things. I see them as being biblical, and I see them as things that need to be talked about. So I give this book, on a scale of 10, a 9.5. I know that's insanely a high score, but I really think it is a helpful book. I think you should read it. I think your pastor should read it. I think church members should read it and be helped by it. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video, guys. This has been my review of 9 Marks of a Healthy Church by Mark Dever. And if you enjoy content like this, please, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. But please subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. I, do a lot of Bible reviews and things too, but I also do book reviews from time to time. And there will be more coming. So anyway, please hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts about 9 Marks. Have you read it? Have you heard of 9 Marks Ministries? What are your thoughts? Would love to engage with you and hear from you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.